Next week, on the verge of remarrying, I went to visit my late husband's grave. As I wiped the rain off his photograph on the headstone, a young boy approached me and said, "Ma'am, this man is still alive. He's at my house." Shaking, I followed him once, and when I opened the door, I was petrified. A late summer afternoon in Charleston, South Carolina, under a fine drizzle. The harbor wind blew through the Spanish moss and ancient oaks of the cemetery. There is a coldness that doesn't come from the weather, but from the human soul when standing before a grave where no one is buried beneath the earth. My name is Clara Sterling, and I am 35 years old. Before the tragedy, I was simply the wife of Julian Hayes, the CEO of Atlantic Vanguard Shipping. Outsiders called him the big boss of the Eastern Docks. To me, he was just a husband who often suffered from stomach ulcers and who, upon coming home at night, preferred nothing more than a hearty bowl of beef stew with a thick slice of crusty sourdough bread. On the night of the 18th of June, 2021, the yacht Crimson Wave caught fire off the coast of Hilton Head. Julian was attending a party with business partners on board. When I ran to the marina, the fire had already painted a corner of the ocean red. They held me back so I couldn't get any closer. I screamed until my voice gave out, asking where my husband was, but no one had an answer. After 3 days of searching, they only handed me a sealed evidence bag containing a charred piece of his suit jacket, the shattered watch I had gifted him, and a piece of his wedding band, warped by the intense heat. There was no body, not a single bone, no parting words. Even so, my husband's family erected a cenotaph, an empty tomb in his honor. Eleanor, my husband's stepmother, stood before the headstone weeping until she nearly fainted. She took my hand and, with a broken voice, said, "Clara, the ocean is so cold. If we can't find his body, Julian must at least have a place to return to. Don't push yourself anymore, you poor thing." I looked at the photo of my husband on the stone. In the picture, he wore a navy blue suit. His gaze was deep but bright. I listened to Eleanor. I listened to the sighs of the relatives, but in my heart, there was only one sentence. Until I see him with my own eyes, I will not believe it. After the ceremony, the family's corporate lawyer brought documents to me on several occasions. They stated that I needed to sign Julian's declaration of death to facilitate the transfer of assets, shares, and the management of the company. I pushed the papers back across the desk every time. I refused to sign. Eleanor was stunned. "Do you plan to embrace his shadow for the rest of your life?" I replied very quietly, "If you call Julian a shadow, I'm sorry. To me, he is still my husband." From that day on, people pitied me less and grew increasingly impatient with me. Atlantic Vanguard, after Julian's disappearance, was floundering like a ship with a broken rudder. He had once told me, "Clara, this company isn't just about money. It's my father's sweat. It's half my life. It's the livelihood of hundreds of families." Back then, I listened and nodded, never imagining that one day I would be the one sitting in his chair. I learned to be the CEO during boardroom meetings as tense as guitar strings, under the distrustful glare of shareholders and the whispers of employees in the hallways. There were those who said, "What does a woman know about cargo ships and freight ports?" I heard it all, and of course, it hurt. But in this life, people's tongues are like the crashing waves of the open ocean. You can't force them to be quiet just because you're tired. At night, I would open my husband's old leather notebook and read a page where he had written, "The eastern seaboard route must be maintained at all costs." Stroking that line of ink, my tears would fall. In those days, Eleanor always played the role of the benevolent mother. She'd have the housekeeper make me chicken soup. She would put a hand on my shoulder and say, "Seeing you carry all this breaks my heart. Why don't you let Preston help you a little? He is Julian's brother, after all." Preston Hayes was my husband's younger half-brother. He was 4 years younger than Julian, soft-spoken, and in front of anyone, he would call me sister-in-law with absolute sweetness. "Clara, consider me family. I don't want to fight for anything. I just want to preserve Atlantic Vanguard for my brother." It sounded so righteous. But Julian had warned me once. Preston smiles a lot. but his eyes rarely do. Don't hate him, but don't trust him either, unless there is paper and ink involved. At the time, I teased him, saying that being a CEO made him see everyone as a contract with hidden trapdoors. He had laughed out loud and replied that caution is never a bad thing, especially with those who sit at your own dinner table. 3 years passed, and I continued to religiously visit his empty grave. Every time I cleaned his photo, I told him how the company was doing. As long as I could stay on my feet, Atlantic Vanguard would not fall into the hands of outsiders. That morning, I walked into the boardroom on the 17th floor of the downtown headquarters. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Charleston harbor looked blurred by the rain. At the head of the table was Julian's chair. In 3 years, I never felt like it belonged to me. I placed my hand on the backrest and heard my own heartbeat, loud and clear. "Julian," I murmured. "Until you come back, I don't have permission to surrender." The memorial dinner for my late father-in-law's passing fell on a day of heavy rain that year. The Hayes family estate in the historic South of Broad district had its lights on early. Out in the courtyard, the rain dripped from the magnolia trees onto the brick pathways. In the kitchen, the aroma of honey-baked ham, roasted lamb, deviled eggs, and a rich low-country shrimp boil rose deliciously. When he was alive, Thomas Hayes Sr. loved having all the traditional Southern flavors at his table. He used to say that whoever returned from far away didn't need exotic delicacies, just a good hot meal and the family gathered together. Remembering his words, every year I went down to the kitchen myself to season the dishes and set the table. Eleanor always said, "You are the CEO of the company now. Leave the kitchen work to the staff. A woman who is too capable suffers too much." Her words sounded compassionate, but every letter seemed to carry a tiny, hidden hook. I would just smile and reply, "He liked home-cooked meals. I'll do what I can." Eleanor sat at the round dining table wearing an elegant dark velvet dress, her hair pinned up perfectly, absent-mindedly turning a wine glass by its stem. Seeing her, anyone would think she was the perfect matriarch, the devoted second wife guarding the home. But after 3 years living alone in that house, I understood that there are tears that do not fall out of grief, but rather at the exact moment they are needed to soften others. Preston arrived later than the rest. He wore a crisp white shirt, carried an expensive bottle of Cabernet, and upon entering, bowed his head slightly before his father's portrait. "Dad, I'm late. Don't hold it against me. There's been a lot of work at the company lately." He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. I, who was placing a water glass on the table, paused for a moment. Yes, there was a lot of work, but largely because everything had gotten complicated since Preston's people started appearing in the logistics departments. Eleanor wiped a tear from her eye and said, "Seeing that you two are still taking care of Atlantic Vanguard, I'm sure your father rests in peace." Preston turned to me, his voice gentle. "Clara, you've lost so much weight these days. If Julian saw you putting the whole world on your shoulders, he'd die of grief." I looked at him and answered, "I can still handle it." He smiled faintly. "I know you are incredibly capable, but a shipping empire isn't something one person can hold up alone. You're a woman, and you've suffered a massive trauma. I'm just afraid you'll burn out." That sentence sounded like concern, but in the middle of a family dinner, in front of the relatives, it was the equivalent of saying, I didn't have the mental strength to keep my position. "Preston is right," an uncle chimed in. "No matter how smart a woman is, she needs a man to back her up. Clara is young. Maintaining the entire Hayes empire is too much." I placed my silverware on the table, and before I could speak, Eleanor sighed. "Clara, I say this from the bottom of my heart. I thank you for looking after the company for Julian, but Preston is also a Hayes. He is Julian's blood brother. Why don't you let him lend you a hand?" Hearing the words blood and family, a knot formed in my throat. I was Julian's wife, the one who signed the papers for him, the one who had weathered every corporate storm for 3 years, and yet, because we didn't share blood, I would always be an outsider. I spoke quietly. Eleanor, I am not stopping Preston from helping at the company, but executive control, finances, and port data must be governed by the board of directors. Powers cannot be transferred just because of a dinner table comment. The atmosphere in the dining room tensed instantly. Preston waved his hands quickly. Sister-in-law, don't misunderstand me. I'm not asking for power. I just see you working yourself to the bone and I want to lighten your load. If you don't trust me, let it be. Incredible. With a single sentence, I went from someone defending corporate principles to being the paranoid, stingy sister-in-law. Eleanor set her glass on the table. The faint clink of crystal against wood chilled my soul. Clara, I don't blame you, but you must remember that in this house, you are not the only one grieving Julian. Preston lost a brother. I lost a son. Your pain is a 1. Mine is a 10. I looked down. If I had been the old Clara, I would have apologized immediately. But these 3 years had taught me something. Not everyone who cries is the one who hurts the most. I replied, I have never thought that I am the only one suffering. But I also cannot do the exact opposite of what Julian asked me to do, just out of grief. Eleanor looked at me with reddened eyes. What did he ask of you? I looked up. He asked that company matters remain crystal clear, in paper and ink, and that with family I should be even stricter, because leniency is the biggest hole in the hull of a sinking ship. Preston let out a small chuckle, though his smile was tight. Julian was always so careful, sometimes too careful, turning his own family into strangers. That sentence gave me a chill. I watched him as he leaned over to serve his mother a piece of ham, as if he hadn't said anything grave at all. The dinner ended in forced discomfort. The relatives left, and Eleanor went upstairs to rest. I went down to the kitchen to help the housekeeper clean up. As I passed through the back hallway, I heard Preston's voice on the veranda. Yeah. Let the pressure build. The tighter she tries to hold on, the more impatient the shareholders will get. Don't squeeze too hard just yet. I stopped dead in my tracks behind the heavy wooden door. I didn't hear the person on the other end. Only Preston lowering his voice. Relax. She's a woman who has spent 3 years clinging to her husband's tombstone. A couple of hit pieces in the press will be enough to make people doubt her sanity. I gripped the dish towel in my hands. Outside, the rain pounded against the roof. Inside, the house still smelled of the dinner, which seemed warm, but in reality chilled me to the bone. I turned around in silence, without going out to confront him. An old proverb says, you can know a person's face, but not their heart. Sometimes, though, the heart doesn't need to be fully exposed. Just a crack is enough to see how dark it is inside. That night, I stood for a long time in front of my father-in-law's memorial altar and Julian's photo. Eleanor maintained her kindly facade, and Preston kept calling me sister-in-law with a voice like honey. But I began to understand that in this house, they didn't need to throw me out the door. They only needed to slowly strip away my place to stand. On Monday morning, I arrived at the company while the sky was still an overcast gray. The overnight rain hadn't dried, and a long line of freight trucks waited at the port entrance. The distant sound of ship horns resonated heavily. Atlantic Vanguard's headquarters overlooked the harbor. In the past, Julian used to stand by the glass, pointing at the massive yellow cranes and telling me, "Look, every one of those shipping containers puts food on someone's table. A boss who only looks at the money, sooner or later, he sinks." I entered the boardroom with that phrase echoing in my ears. On the table, a red folder sat right in front of the CEO's chair. Mark, the head of sales, looked pale. Clara, Southern Logistics, just sent over a document canceling the freight contract for the Baltimore route. I opened the file. An $8 million contract, right on the verge of final signatures, and they were pulling out. The reason sounded very corporate. Adjustment in transportation strategy. But looking at the final line, I saw they were transferring their operations to Palmetto ports. Harrison Croft's territory. I set the papers down. What is the real reason? Mark looked around and lowered his voice. Word is they don't trust us because of internal instability. Someone told them executive leadership was about to change. The silence in the room was absolute. I looked at the faces around me. Some took notes without looking up. Others actively avoided my gaze. The rumor about a leadership change had barely been hinted at by Preston at the family dinner, and by the next morning the clients already knew. Bad news travels faster than a courier in rush hour. Before I could process it, Teresa, the CFO, walked in looking even more stressed. Clara, the Bank of the South just suspended the disbursement of our $40 million line of credit. They are demanding a justification regarding management risks. I frowned. What management risks? Teresa slid her phone across the table. There was an email with an anonymous letter attached, claiming that I frequently went to talk to myself at my husband's grave, showing signs of prolonged obsession and a lack of mental lucidity required for major financial decisions. I let out a laugh, but it tasted bitter in my throat. Visiting my husband's grave was now proof of insanity. No one dared to speak. Victor, the head of operations, sighed. That's not all. The fuel supplier changed their terms. They are demanding a $2,500,000 upfront payment for this month's batch, or they won't fuel the 3 cargo ships currently docked. I looked at the tracking panel. Those ships had to leave for the eastern route. If we delayed, we would face a chain reaction of massive fines, one tight knot, and the whole ship loses oxygen. I asked, they've always given us net 4-5 payment terms. Why change today? Victor shook his head. They say they heard there are deep financial problems at Atlantic Vanguard, and they don't want to risk it. Rumors again. I stood up and walked to the window. Down below, the trucks looked like exhausted ants. I could clearly see an invisible hand strangling Atlantic Vanguard without noise, without frontal attacks. Just sowing fear in the clients, spooking the banks, pushing away suppliers, and alarming the shareholders. At that moment, the door opened, and Preston walked in wearing a light blue dress shirt and holding a folder, looking deeply concerned. The exemplary brother, suffering for the company. Clara, I heard about the bank and came running. Are you all right? I turned around. You found out quickly. He hesitated, then smiled. I have some contacts in finance. They tipped me off so we could be prepared. Mr. Arthur, a minority shareholder at the end of the table, chimed in. If Preston has contacts, it would be ideal for him to speak with the bank. Truth be told, right now the market needs to see a Hayes man stepping up. I stared at him. Are you saying that after 3 years of running this place, I am still not considered part of the Hayes family? The man grew nervous. Don't misunderstand me. But you are a woman. You just lost your husband. And there are rumors about your health. He left the sentence hanging in the air, but everyone understood. I was a widowed woman, supposedly unstable, and above all, a stranger in a family that only trusted blood. Preston hurried to intervene. Clara, Mr. Arthur didn't mean it like that. Everyone is just worried about you. Let's do this. Let me temporarily handle relations with the banks and the major clients. You remain CEO. I'll just support you from behind the scenes. I found it almost funny. Support from behind, but his hands were already resting on the back of my chair. I replied, I appreciate it, Preston. But the delegation of executive power isn't decided by emotions in a boardroom. Any proposal requires a formal document, liability limits, and a risk assessment. Atlantic Vanguard is not a flea market where anyone can just walk in and take over a stall. Some people lowered their heads. Preston kept smiling, but his eyes darkened. Always so strict. I'm just afraid that by clinging to the rules, we'll lose the chance to save the company. I looked right through him. Companies die from breaking the rules much faster than they do from being slow. The meeting lasted over 3 hours. We formed a crisis team. We called every client, sent letters to the bank, renegotiated the fuel. I talked until my throat was completely dry. But with every call, I realized the rumors had already spread like oil in water. Near noon, The communications team sent me several press clippings. The headlines were polite but ruthless. Is Atlantic Vanguard's CEO ready after family tragedy? And shipping empires facing the risk of emotional leadership. One article even published a photo of me standing in front of Julian's cenotaph, taken secretly from a distance. I stared at the photo for a long time. That day, I had only gone to clean my husband's headstone, and in the hands of others, my nostalgia had been forged into a weapon against me. By late afternoon, corporate attorney Mitchell Reed arrived. He had been a college friend of Julian's and later the company's legal advisor. As he walked in, he dropped a stack of printed newspapers on the desk. Clara, someone is manufacturing a psychological profile to force you out of your seat. I poured him a glass of water, my hand shaking from sheer exhaustion. I figured. Mitchell looked at me. Do you suspect anyone? I stayed silent for a moment. Outside, the sky was darkening, and the amber lights of the port were flickering on. I have plenty of suspicions, but no proof. Without it, I'll just be a hysterical woman in their eyes. Mitchell sighed. Then we have to find proof. I looked at Julian's photo on the desk. He was smiling with that same calm demeanor, as if I could turn around, look again, and he'd walk right through the door. I spoke slowly. I'm not afraid of losing in business, Mitchell. I am only terrified that the stab in the back is coming from someone who sits at my own dinner table. He didn't respond. Some sentences don't need comfort because their own weight hurts enough. That night, when almost all the lights in the building had gone out, I was still in the office. Outside, the ship horns echoed distantly. On my computer screen was the list of at-risk contracts. On my phone, a text from Eleanor. If you're tired, let Preston take the weight. Don't overexert yourself and end up ruining Julian's legacy. I read the text over and over, then placed the phone face down. They weren't going to snatch the company away in one violent tug. They just wanted to exhaust me, make outsiders doubt me, and use family advice to push me until I let go of the steering wheel myself. But they forgot one thing. When a woman has kept her husband alive in her heart for 3 years, she doesn't drop to her knees so easily in a financial storm. 3 days after that tense meeting, Preston brought Harrison Croft to Atlantic Vanguard. That day, the sun was shining bright in Charleston after the rains. The light poured through the windows and illuminated the long mahogany table. I sat at the head, surrounded by financial reports drenched in red ink. The ships weren't sailing. The bank was holding the capital. 2 major clients had paused negotiations. The company was like someone being suffocated, still breathing, but every gasp hurt. Preston walked in first, wearing a calibrated smile and an air of urgency. Clara, I invited Harrison over for a chat. He comes in good faith to help us in this difficult time. Behind him walked a man in his early 40s. Harrison Croft was tall, elegant, wearing a tailored light gray suit, his hair impeccable. He didn't rush to shake my hand. He merely offered a slight nod. Hello, Clara. I've heard a lot about you. Finally, we get a chance to speak seriously. I stood up, maintaining a professional distance. Good afternoon, Harrison. In the office, I would prefer Clara or Mrs. Sterling for formality. He smirked, as if my coldness amused him. Understood. Apologies for the presumption. Harrison's Palmetto Ports had been Atlantic Vanguard's biggest rival for years. Julian used to tell me that Harrison never made a lot of noise, but when he set his sights on something, he never let go. That phrase echoed clearly in my mind at that moment. Preston offered him a chair and personally poured him a coffee. Clara, Harrison knows the bank froze our credit. His group is willing to guarantee a $30 million line of credit upfront, and they will let us use the auxiliary docks at Palmetto Ports for 3 months. That way, our 3 stranded cargo ships can set sail. I looked at the proposal on the table. The terms were perfect. So perfect they were absurd. Low interest rates, flexible terms, minimal port fees. In this life, free cheese is always sitting on a mousetrap. I asked. And what does Palmetto Ports ask for in return? Harrison interlaced his fingers on the table, speaking slowly. For now, a strategic alliance. Atlantic Vanguard has the fleet and the international client base. Palmetto has the ports, the warehousing, and the cash flow. If we shake hands, we survive together. I took a sip of my cold tea. Rivals for years, and suddenly you want to save each other. It's incredibly moving. Preston rushed to smile. You're being unfair to him. Clara, in business, there are no eternal enemies. Besides, Harrison had a lot of respect for Julian. Harrison looked at the photo of Julian in the corner of the office. Julian was a man of great integrity. I genuinely respected him. It would be a real shame if the company he left behind collapsed. Hearing real shame, my blood ran cold. In his mouth, my husband's company sounded like an antique about to be pawned for pennies. The meeting ended without signatures. I stated I needed the board to review it. Preston looked annoyed but kept his mask on. Review it well. I know you're careful. That same evening, Eleanor invited me to dinner. When I arrived at the estate, I saw Harrison Croft sitting in the parlor, drinking bourbon and eating cheese straws. Eleanor wore an elegant light blue silk dress, smiling sweetly as if nothing in the world could disturb her peace. Clara, you're here. I invited Harrison to dinner. If he has the goodwill to help our company, we must be grateful. I looked at Preston, who avoided my eyes while peeling an orange for his mother. The dinner spread included roasted lamb, honey-baked ham, and other dishes everything Julian used to love. I don't know if Eleanor did it on purpose, but sitting at the table and seeing the empty chair beside me made my heart ache with a dull thud. She served me a slice of ham. Eat. You've lost so much weight. A woman carrying a company alone suffers too much, no matter how capable she is. Harrison smoothly intervened. Strong women are usually only strong because they don't have anyone allowing them to be weak. But if someone were by your side, you wouldn't have to torture yourself like this. I put my silverware down. Harrison, I think it's a bit early to be having personal conversations at my family dinner. He wasn't angry. He just smiled. My apologies. I saw you looking so overwhelmed that I spoke out of turn. Eleanor sighed. Clara, I know you are loyal to Julian, but he's been gone for 3 years. The living cannot cling to the cold forever. You will end up burning your own hands. I say this from the bottom of my heart. If there is a good man willing to take care of you and save Atlantic Vanguard, you should think about it. I stared at her. What exactly is it you want me to think about? Preston set down his wine glass, his voice as soft as a breeze. Clara, if you and Harrison became family, Palmetto Ports' help would be completely legitimate. The banks would relax, and the shareholders would stop demanding your removal. A knot choked my throat. The entire table fell dead silent. The only sound was the clinking of the housekeeper washing dishes in the kitchen. I asked slowly, Are you asking me to marry Harrison? Eleanor rubbed her eyes. No one is forcing you. I am only worrying about you and Julian's legacy. You are young. Are you going to bury your life next to an empty grave? I let out a stifled laugh. You just said you aren't forcing me, yet every word you speak corners me against my husband's altar. Harrison looked at me, lowering his tone. Clara, I'm not asking you to forget Julian. I just want to offer you a way out. A woman fighting the market alone. It's exhausting. I looked into his eyes, a polite and calm gaze, but deep down, there was something dark, like water at the bottom of an abandoned well. I replied, I appreciate it, but I don't need anyone to hold my hand and guide me just yet. The dinner ended in a glacial chill. They call it keeping up appearances. I went upstairs to the family's memorial altar to light a candle for Julian. The thin smoke drifted past his portrait. Downstairs, I heard Eleanor whisper to Preston, This girl is still too stubborn. Preston replied, If she's stubborn, We'll just have to soften her heart first. I stood motionless in front of the altar, watching the wax melt. They say fire tests gold, and adversity tests people. But I began to realize that in the Hayes family, adversity didn't just happen. Someone was lighting the fire to force me to thank the arsonist. The emergency shareholder meeting took place on a Saturday morning in the grand conference room of Atlantic Vanguard. Outside, the blistering sun reflected off the windows. I walked in and saw almost all the major stakeholders present. Those faces that once laughed and drank with Julian now looked at me with a mix of pity and impatience. Preston stood on the right side of the long table. In front of him was a thick stack of documents. He stood up when he saw me, using his sweet tone. "Clara, have a seat. Everyone just wants to hear the plan to save Atlantic Vanguard." I pulled out my chair and sat down. "Let's begin then." Mr. Arthur, the veteran shareholder, took the floor. As an old friend of my father-in-law, he maintained some respect. "Clara, I speak to you with honesty. These past years you have held the company together with sheer willpower, but the situation has changed. The ships are docked, the bank is withholding cash, contracts are bleeding out. If we don't get liquid capital, Vanguard won't survive." Another shareholder interrupted. "We need stability. You cling to Julian's disappearance, and it's understandable that your mental state is affected. But this company cannot run on grief." I stared right at him. "Explain to me exactly how my mental state affects my corporate decisions." He coughed awkwardly. "It's not a specific decision. It's your image as a leader. The press publishes it, partners read it. Who is going to trust us like this?" My chest burned. They were using my pain as evidence. My visits to my husband's grave as proof to doubt my sanity. Truly, in this life, you don't need a knife to make someone bleed. Preston stood up right on cue. "Gentlemen, I will speak plainly. Right now, there is only one rapid solution to save the shipping line. Harrison Crofts Palmetto Ports is willing to guarantee $30 million, open their auxiliary docks, support us with fuel, and bring the banks back to the negotiating table." "Mr. Arthur asked immediately. "In exchange for what?" Preston looked at me, feigning discomfort. "Harrison wants a bond strong enough to justify it. If Clara and he are joined in marriage, both sides become family, and any collaboration is legally unassailable. Atlantic Vanguard is saved, shareholders relax, and employees keep their jobs." The room erupted in whispers. I sat frozen, digging my fingernails into my palms until it hurt. A middle-aged female shareholder said, "It's really not a bad idea. You're young. Julian has been missing for 3 years. The living must go on living." I turned to her. "My husband still does not have a body in the ground." She sighed. "But we cannot let an entire company die for someone who we don't even know is alive or dead." That sentence felt like a slap to the face. I wanted to ask her, "If the man in that empty grave were your husband, would you say that so lightly?" But I swallowed hard. In this room, if I raised my voice, they would call it a lack of emotional control. But if you don't accept, Preston continued softly, "the board will have to find a way to temporarily alter the executive leadership. I do not want to take my brother's place. But if the situation demands it..." He left the threat hanging. How ironic. The man who wants to steal your chair always claims he is being forced to sit in it. I asked. "You've prepared very well, haven't you?" From the rescue plan to my dismissal, everything was laid out. Preston flushed. "You're being unfair to me. I'm doing this for the company." Mr. Arthur tapped the table. "Clara, honestly, do you have any other alternative?" I looked around. No one was on my side. Some felt genuine pity, others feared for their wallets, and some had clearly already been bought by Preston. The whole room was a net, and I was the fish cornered at the bottom. That afternoon, I returned to the Hayes estate. Eleanor was standing in front of Julian's altar, dabbing away tears with a handkerchief. Seeing me, she immediately said, "You see, the shareholders aren't even family, yet they worry." You are Julian's wife. Are you going to let his life's work collapse? I was so exhausted I didn't even take off my shoes. Do you really want me to marry Harrison? She turned, her eyes red. I want you to save the work of your husband's life. Remarrying isn't betrayal. You are doing it for him. I let out a broken laugh as tears welled up. Marrying another man for the sake of my husband. It sounds so noble coming from your mouth. Eleanor adopted a severe tone. Don't be insolent. Being faithful is good, but being faithful to the point of destroying an empire is sheer stubbornness. You are at the top. Now you have to think about the hundreds of people depending on you. I looked at Julian's portrait. He maintained that calm expression, as if he were listening to everything without being able to say a word. That night, Harrison Croft sent me the prenuptial agreement. I read every line with ice-cold hands. There was a clause stipulating that after the marriage, for stability and strategic consolidation, I would grant him proxy voting rights for the majority of my shares for 5 years. I held the papers with a bitter smile. I hadn't even put on the wedding dress yet, and they were already measuring the size of my cage. I sat in Julian's old home office. His fountain pen was still in the drawer. His old notebook fell open to the page where he wrote, "As long as we have our people at Vanguard, there is hope." I stroked that sentence. Outside, the rain drummed against the glass. I remembered the nights he clutched his stomach in pain, yet still ordered the driver to take him to the docks to check the refrigerated containers. I remembered his calloused hands and his joking voice. "You always worry too much. I'm still strong as an ox." Strong. And yet, he left, and didn't return for 3 years. I cried for a long time. Then I wiped my face and called Preston. "Preston, I accept meeting with Harrison to plan the engagement." On the other end of the line, there was a silence of several seconds before his voice lit up. "Clara, it's the right thing to do. Julian would definitely want you to do this." I closed my eyes. "But I have one condition. The engagement ceremony will be in exactly 1 week. I need time to put the company's affairs in order, and I need to go to Julian's grave to tell him." Preston replied hastily. "Done. I'll arrange it. A week is plenty of time to invite the shareholders, the banks, and the press, and do it in style." I hung up. In the room, there was only the sound of the rain and the smell of old paper. I knew that from this moment on, they thought I had lost. But I didn't say yes to marry Harrison. I said yes because I needed 7 more days. 7 days to breathe, to check every crack, to secure Atlantic Vanguard before they chained me to that open trap with a wedding ring. The next morning, I drove alone to the coastal cemetery. I didn't tell Eleanor, nor Preston, nor the chauffeur. There are apologies that can only be made in private. With too many people around, tears just become a spectacle to be judged. That day in Charleston, a very fine drizzle was falling. It wasn't a storm, just water sliding down the glass, persistent as a sadness that clings to you and refuses to drop. The road to the cemetery was deserted, flanked by tall timber pines bent by the sea wind. In the distance, the whistle of the cargo ships echoed from the port. It sounded familiar, yet piercing. I parked at the entrance, took a bouquet of white hydrangeas from the trunk, a box of pecan pralines, a small bottle of bourbon, and a gray towel. The pralines were Julian's favorite. Whenever he came back from a trip down south, I would have them ready. He would break off a piece, eat it, and frown. Too sweet, but delicious. A man's life sometimes needs a little sweetness, so he doesn't dry up like salted fish. I used to scold him. "Your stomach hurts, and you're eating sugar." He would laugh. Having my wife here to remind me, what do I have to fear? Thinking of that, I gripped the box tightly. He always said, "I have someone to remind me." And now, I had spent 3 years reminding a simple photograph. Julian's cenotaph was in a corner of the cemetery, facing the ocean. The black granite headstone was wet, his photo beneath the glass, had a thin layer of water over it. His face looked serene, as if watching me from very far away. I knelt down and arranged the flowers. Julian, I'm here. The wind blew, and my dark mourning clothes clung to my body. I used the towel to clean the headstone and the raindrops off the glass. With every wipe, his face became clearer. That same serene but determined look he had in the boardroom. The more I cleaned it, the more my soul broke. Julian, forgive me. I said it very softly, afraid I would lose control if I spoke aloud. Yesterday, I agreed to meet Harrison to arrange our engagement. In a week, they will announce it to all the shareholders, the press, and the banks. I know if you could hear me, you'd be furious. I discussed myself. I opened the box of pralines and placed it next to the small bottle of bourbon. The sweet smell of pecans and sugar mixed with the scent of wet earth. But my love, Atlantic Vanguard can't breathe anymore. The ships are stranded, the banks are blocking the cash, contracts are being canceled, and they want to replace me. They say I live tied to the ghost of a dead man, that I've lost my mind, that I'm just a woman clinging to the Hayes family's power. Tears fell onto the back of my hands. I can take them insulting me, looking down on me. But I can't let your shipping line sink. It's your company, your father's sweat, the livelihood of so many. You once told me that a boss who only saves his own pride doesn't deserve the title. I stood up, facing his photo. I'm not marrying to forget you. I'm just doing everything I can to save the ship while there's still water beneath it. But I feel like I'm bailing out water with hands stained in blood. I stood there for a long time. The rain soaked through my clothes, and my knees felt numb against the cold stone. The wind whistled through the pines, and seagulls cried in the distance. Then, I heard children arguing in hushed voices behind a pine trunk. You go ask her. Why me? She's crying. You ask her quietly. That candy looks really good. I wiped my tears and turned around. A short distance away, several little heads were peeking out. They wore worn-out clothes, mud-caked sneakers, and looked very thin. Seeing me, they backed away in fear, except for one who stayed a few steps ahead. He looked about 11 or 12, his skin tanned by the coastal sun, his hair short and uneven, wearing a jacket that was far too big for him, like a hand-me-down from an adult. He held a crumpled plastic bag in his hand. He looked at me, then at the box of pralines on the grave, with an expression that was a mix of hunger and fear. I asked, "What are you doing here?" He got scared and shook his head vigorously. "I wasn't going to take it, ma'am. I was waiting for you to leave so I could ask you. My grandma says food left for offerings has to be asked for, that taking it without permission makes the spirits mad." That answer softened my heart. "What's your name?" "Leo. I live down in Blackfish Creek, across the marsh." I looked behind him. The other kids were still hiding, their eyes gleaming with hunger. I took a few more candies out of my purse and handed them to Leo. "Here, share these. But remember, next time you want something, always ask the family first." Leo took them with both hands, giving a very polite nod. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." He made a move to leave, but his gaze stopped on the photograph on the headstone. The boy stood perfectly still. At first, it was just a glance. Then he took a step closer and squinted to get a better look. The wind ruffled his hair, and his childish face grew strangely serious. I felt my heart skip a beat. "What are you looking at?" Leo pointed at Julian's photo, his voice hesitant. "Ma'am," the man in the photo. "Is he your husband?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, my husband." He scratched his head, looking at me, then back at the photo. His lips trembled, as if he were afraid I would scold him for saying something inappropriate. "It's just that. This man looks exactly like Uncle Seven, the guy who lives at my house." I froze. The drizzle kept falling. I felt my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. I asked, my voice completely hoarse. What did you just say? Leo hugged his little bag of candy to his chest, speaking very quietly. I said the man in the picture looks exactly like Uncle Seven, the one living at my grandma's house. I looked at the boy standing in front of me and felt as if the ocean wind had slammed directly into my chest. A poor kid asking for candy could say anything at random. Kids thinking people look alike is common, but for some reason, his words turned my legs to ice. I tried to keep my voice as calm as possible. Who is Uncle Seven? Tell me more. Leo looked back toward where his friends were hiding. Maybe he was afraid of talking too much, or that I'd get angry for comparing a dead man to a living one. Uncle Seven lives at my grandma's house. He's not from our creek. My grandma rescued him out in the sawgrass a long time ago. My heart pounded harder. How long ago? Leo frowned, counting on his dirty fingers. A long time. I was in 3rd grade. Now I'm going into 6th. Gotta be about 3 years. 3 years. Hearing those 2 words sucked me right back to the night of the burning yacht. 3 years since Julian vanished. 3 years since they built a tomb with no body. 3 years living as the guardian of a door I didn't even know would ever open again. I asked, what is Uncle Seven's real name? Leo shook his head. We don't know. Grandma gave him that name. When she saved him, he couldn't remember anything. You ask him his name, he don't know. You ask where he lives, he don't know. He just grabs his head and shakes. I swallowed hard. What happened to him? He was hurt real bad, ma'am. Grandma says the water was real rough that night. In the morning, she found him stuck in the pluff mud in the reeds, covered in dirt, clothes ripped, his head bleeding, and a big burn mark on his back. The fisherman took him to the free clinic, but he didn't have no ID or phone. I gripped the edge of my coat. The cemetery was still empty. The rain fell on my shoulders. I was soaked, but I no longer felt the cold. And why didn't he go look for his family? Leo looked down, gently kicking the wet dirt with his sneaker. He's real scared of strangers. Once, these 2 guys in suits came around, saying they were from a charity. Said they wanted to take him to a hospital for free. But soon as Uncle Seven heard one of their voices, he hid under the bed shaking like crazy. Grandma thought it was fishy and wouldn't let him take him. A knot tightened in my throat. If this really was Julian, then someone had already gone looking for him, and not to save him, but to take him God knows where. I knelt down to Leo's eye level. Look closely at this photo. Does Uncle Seven really look like the man in this picture? Leo stepped closer to the headstone. He stared at Julian for a long time. The expression of a candy-hungry kid vanished, replaced by genuine confusion. He looks just like him, ma'am, but Uncle Seven is skinnier, darker from the sun, got a patchy beard, and his hair is longer. The guy in the photo looks real clean, like a rich man. My Uncle Seven looks like a deckhand the waves beat up real bad. I felt a stab of agony. The man who once wore custom-tailored suits in front of shareholders, who commanded silence in a boardroom with just a look, if he was alive and looked the way Leo described. I didn't dare imagine it. I asked, my voice trembling. Does he have any marks on his body? Any scars? An injury? Or something he always keeps with him? Leo looked up instantly. Yes. Behind his left shoulder, he's got a long scar. Grandma says he got burned or cut by hot metal, and he's got a busted burnt watch. The strap is almost broken in half, but if anyone touches it, he gets real mad. I hid it once to play a joke, and he couldn't find it. He sat on the porch all afternoon, with red eyes. Grandma yelled at me so loud. She said even if we're poor, we don't mess with other people's memories. My ears rang. A scar behind the left shoulder. When Julian was 32, a dock worker got trapped in a shipping freezer at the port. Julian ran in to pull him out, and a piece of searing hot metal struck his back. I was the one who applied ointment to that scar for weeks, and the charred watch was my birthday gift. After the fire, they told me they had found his watch in the debris, but what they gave me in the sealed bag was just the shattered face, no strap, I had been too devastated to think clearly and ask why it wasn't intact. I dug my fingers into the stone next to the grave. Does he ever say anyone's name? Leo tilted his head thoughtfully. The rain formed little beads in his messy hair. Yes, ma'am. When he has nightmares, he says a name. I can't hear it too good, but I think he says, Clara. I closed my eyes, and the tears poured out without me being able to stop them. In front of me was my husband's empty grave. Beside me, a poor marsh kid holding offering candy. And between those two utterly unrelated things, a door that had been locked shut for 3 years had just been kicked wide open. I asked quickly, "Where is your village?" "Past the salt marshes, down the dirt road. Takes over an hour." "Take me to him. Now." Leo hesitated. "But ma'am, what is it?" "Don't scare Uncle Seven. He's real scared of people he don't know, especially people wearing black. Anytime someone in dark clothes comes asking questions, he hides." I looked down at my dark mourning clothes. Suddenly, they felt as heavy as a tombstone on my chest. If that man was Julian, what kind of terror had he lived through these 3 years that a simple color terrified him? I took off my dark coat and stuffed it into my purse. I pulled some cash out of my wallet and held it out to Leo. "Here. Go buy food for your friends. But please, do not tell anyone you are taking me to see Uncle Seven. Not even your friends." Leo didn't take it right away. He looked at the money, then at me. "Grandma says we can't take too much money from strangers or we'll be in debt." My chest ached. A kid so poor he had to eat graveyard offerings, yet he maintained such dignity. Meanwhile, out there in the city, there were men in luxury offices delivering moral speeches, but with souls more rotten than a bottomless barrel. I pressed the money into his hand. "It's not a debt. I'm giving it to you so you can buy rice and eggs for your grandma, as a thank you for telling me the truth." Leo grabbed it with both hands and muttered, "Yes, ma'am." I looked back at the grave. The box of pralines and the bourbon were still there. A few minutes ago, I was on my knees begging for forgiveness because I had to marry another man, and now I just wanted to smash the headstone to pieces. Not out of anger at him, but because if he was alive, that grave had kept me buried in a lie for 3 years. I bent down to fix the flowers. "Julian, if it's really you, I will take you home. Even if you don't remember me, even if you are afraid of me, even if the entire Hayes family stands in my way, I will never let them erase you again." I stood up and wiped my tears. "Lead the way, Leo." The boy nodded and waved to his friends. "Y'all go home. I'm gonna take this lady to the creek to see Uncle Seven. Don't say nothing to nobody." The kids ran off with the candy, looking back as if they had seen a ghost in the graveyard. I followed Leo toward the exit, leaving Julian's empty tomb behind in the mist and rain. Before me stretched a muddy, unknown dirt road leading deep into the low country. I didn't know if I was going to find a man who merely looked like my husband, or my husband himself, reduced to a version so crushed by life that he had forgotten his own name. But my intuition at that moment was stronger than ever. I hadn't been crazy these past 3 years. I was the only one who refused to believe the lie the Hayes family wanted me to swallow. Leo guided me down a small trail behind the cemetery. It was wet, sticky mud, marked with deep tire ruts from dirt bikes. I, used to high heels and boardrooms, had to roll up my pants, grabbing onto rotting fence posts to keep my balance. Leo walked fast, turning around every so often. "Miss Clara!" "Step on the left." The right side's got too much pluff mud. I fell in once and lost my flip-flop. Grandma laughed for 3 days. Despite my nerves, a small laugh escaped me. How strange life is. With my heart about to explode, a child's innocent comment allowed me to take a deep breath. From the cemetery to the fishing outpost of Blackfish Creek, we skirted a long dirt road alongside the marsh grass and tidal creeks. The wind blew salty, carrying the smell of decaying algae, dried fish, and fresh mud. In the distance, low-slung houses huddled together. Smoke from the kitchens rose like silk threads. A few old John boats rested on the muddy banks. Faded fishing nets covered in patches hung on clotheslines in the wind. Leo chattered as we walked. My creek is real poor, ma'am. When the water's calm, we get fish and shrimp. When there's a storm, we stay inside and fix the nets. Grandma always says even if you're poor, you shouldn't cheat nobody. That's why we only asked for the offerings. We didn't steal them. I looked at the boy's thin back, my heart shrinking. Some kids are so poor they rely on offerings to eat, but they keep their integrity. Nearly an hour later, we reached the last house on the creek. A low-lying shack with an old tin roof. Small fish were drying on the porch in the sun. A white-haired older woman with a hunched back was cleaning vegetables. Seeing Leo, she looked up. "You're back. What took you so long?" Leo ran up and blurted out, "Grandma, I brought this lady. She says the man in the photo at the graveyard is her husband, and he looks just like our Uncle Seven." The old woman dropped the vegetables. Her eyes, though clouded by age, cut like razors. She looked me up and down without inviting me in. "Who are you looking for?" I offered a deep nod of respect. "Hello, Martha. My name is Clara Sterling. I am looking for my husband, Julian Hayes. He disappeared 3 years ago in a fire on the yacht Crimson Wave. Leo told me there is a man here who looks like him." Martha stayed silent. The wind swayed the hanging fish, making them tap together. A moment later, she asked, "Are you sure you want to find him? Sometimes folks find what they're looking for, and they can't stomach it." That sentence made my heart drop. I replied, "I will stomach it. If he is truly my husband, no matter what he has become, I will accept him." Martha looked at me for a moment and sighed. "I'm Grandma Martha. 3 years ago, after a bad storm, I went down to the bank with some neighbors and found a man washed up in the sawgrass. He was purple, bleeding from the head. Half his back burned. We took him to the county clinic. They registered him as a John Doe, with head trauma, burns, and a broken mind. But a few days later, 2 men showed up, said they were from a charity group and wanted to take him to treat him for free." Martha sneered. "I may be poor, but I ain't blind. They dressed like do-gooders, but they had the eyes of hitmen. Plus, 7. Soon as he heard one of their voices, he crawled under the bed, shaking like a fish out of water. I saw things were looking bad, so I told him he died and we already buried him." A chill ran down my spine. And they believed it? Not completely. But in a place like this, it's easy to drive in, but hard to drive out if the locals don't want you to. We're poor, but if someone messes with one of our own, we don't just stand there and watch. They poked around for a few days, then disappeared. Leo chimed in. "Uncle Seven is real nice, ma'am. He knows how to fix nets. He makes me kites. But he's terrified of fire. If somebody lights a big bonfire, he grabs his head." I asked, with a voice I barely recognized as my own, "Where is Uncle Seven?" Martha looked toward the back of the house. "He's patching nets on the back porch. But don't you go rushing at him. He's scared of strangers, especially if they cry and yell his name. If you spook him, he'll run off into the marsh and I won't be able to catch him." I nodded repeatedly. "I understand. I'm just going to look at him. I won't scare him." The old woman led me through the small kitchen. A pot of seafood stew was boiling. The smell of onions and pepper was comforting. Through the back screen door, I saw a man sitting under the tin overhang, his head bowed, mending a torn green net. His shoulders were much bonier than before. His hair brushed his neck. His skin was leathered by the sun. His hands, once impeccably manicured, were calloused from the friction of the ropes. But with one single glance, my heart stopped. Behind his left shoulder, beneath his loose, faded shirt, peeked the long scar I used to rub ointment on every night. On his wrist, the charred watch, tied with a faded strip of cloth. I covered my mouth with my hand. Tears flowed like a river. The man lifted his head at that moment. His gaze met mine. There was no joy in his eyes. He didn't shout my name. There was only panic and absolute bewilderment. He scrambled backward, dropping the netting needle onto the dirty floor. "Martha! Who is this woman?" I stood petrified. For 3 years, I had begged the heavens that my husband was still alive, but no one taught me what to do when he actually was, and when he looked at me like an intruder who had just stumbled into his life by mistake. I had always imagined that if I ever reunited with Julian, I would run to hug him, crying oceans. I imagined he would say my name, take my hand, and say, "Clara, I'm home." But real life rarely indulges us like the movies. The man in front of me was unquestionably my husband. The scar, the watch, the slight curve of his ring finger because he had once caught it in a freezer door. There was no doubt. And yet, his eyes were completely empty. He backed up and cowered behind Martha. The netting needle lay on the floor. He looked at me as if I were about to drown him in the ocean again. Who is this woman? Hearing that phrase hurt so much my face went numb. Leo stood next to me and said softly, "Uncle Seven, this lady says you look like her husband." Julian started shaking his head, breathing heavily. "No, it's not me. I don't know her." I took half a step forward purely on instinct. Julian. Hearing that name, Julian covered his ears. His body began to tremble, and his eyes grew bloodshot. "Don't call me that. Don't say that name." Martha raised a hand to stop me. "Miss Clara, don't push him. Names he don't know terrify him." Once I asked him where he was from, and his head hurt so bad he passed out on the porch. I stopped dead, letting my arms drop, not daring to advance another inch. Never in my life had I felt so useless. My husband was right there, just a few feet away, but the distance between us was deeper than the 3 years of his empty grave. I tried to swallow my sobs. "I'm sorry. I won't scare you anymore." Julian looked at me with deep distrust. His eyes scanned my leather purse, my mud-stained shoes, and he backed up a little more. "Go away. I don't know you." That sentence was spoken softly, but it felt as if someone were slicing my skin with a dull knife. The man who had slept beside me, who made me herbal tea when my stomach hurt, who used to laugh and say that if anyone messed with his wife, they'd have to deal with him, was now telling me he didn't know me. Martha led me back to the kitchen and poured me a cup of hot tea. "Don't take it hard. Since he got here, lots of things scare him. Fire. The smell of diesel. The sound of heavy metal doors. Men shouting. Once they burned trash nearby, and he hid under the cot clutching his watch, shaking. I sat on the doorstep, speaking in a whisper. "Has anyone ever asked him if he remembers anything?" Leo whispered. "Miss Clara, sometimes Uncle Seven talks in his sleep. He says, 'Don't push me in the water, I'm scared.' And I can't call out." I gripped the hot mug in my hands, but my soul was frozen. Martha shook her head. "Asking him causes him pain. I'm old, and I ain't got no medical degrees, but I know you can't force memories out of a man with a broken head. It's like a tree ripped up by a hurricane. If you want it to live, you gotta prop it up slow. If you yank on it, you snap the roots." I looked down. An old woman in a fishing outpost understood this, and I, out of sheer grief, had almost lunged at him, demanding he recognize me. Just then, we heard the rumble of a motorcycle engine stopping outside the house. The local dogs started barking. Leo ran out, peeked through a crack in the fence, and ran back in. Pale. "Grandma! There's an outsider. He ain't from the creek." Martha stood up sharply. I pressed myself against the wall. Out on the dirt road, a man in a dark jacket was questioning the guy drying fish. He held a smartphone and kept glancing toward Martha's house. His posture wasn't that of someone buying fish, but of someone doing surveillance. Hearing the motorcycle from the back porch, Julian panicked. He grabbed his head and backed up until he hit the wooden siding. "They're here. They came back." I turned to him abruptly. Who came back? He didn't answer. Cold sweat broke out on his face, and his lips trembled. Martha helped him sit down. Hush now. Don't ask no more, Miss Clara. Might be the same ones from before. I immediately pulled out my phone and called my corporate lawyer, Mitchell Reed. He answered on the second ring. Mitchell! I found him. There was dead silence on the other end. I kept talking, trying to keep my composure. But he's lost his memory. He's at a creek down by the salt marshes. Strangers have shown up. I need to get him out of here right now. But we can't make it public yet. Mitchell lowered his voice. Do not notify the Hayes family or anyone at the company. I'll call Uncle Arthur. Keep him there. We're on our way. I hung up. I knew Uncle Arthur. He had worked as the fleet manager for my father-in-law since Atlantic Vanguard was just 3 boats. I knew he would bring a discreet car and ask 0 questions. Experienced men don't waste time on curiosity. While we waited, Leo went to the backyard to find Julian some sandals. When he returned, he picked up a piece of dirty plastic near the fence. It must have fallen from the stranger snooping around the back. Miss Clara. Whose is this? I took it. It was a broken parking token. The faded logo was still legible. Palmetto Ports. Harrison Croft's territory. I wrapped the token in a tissue and shoved it deep into my purse. The first thread had just been exposed. For 3 years, I thought I was just looking for my husband. That night, I understood that someone else had been looking for him too, but only to ensure he never came back. By the time Uncle Arthur's car arrived, it was dark. Julian adamantly refused to get in. He looked at the dark sedan parked in the alley and went pale. No, I'm not going. They're going to catch me. I stayed a safe distance away, keeping my voice low. You don't have to trust me. But if you stay, the bad men are going to come. Martha and Leo will go with you. I won't touch you, I promise. He looked at Martha like a lost child. 7. Listen to me, she said gently. Let's get out of here. I'm going with you. Leo grabbed his hand. Uncle 7? I'm going too. We ain't leaving you alone. Finally, he nodded, almost imperceptibly. In the car, Martha and Leo sat next to Julian in the back seat. I sat shotgun. I didn't turn around too much, so as not to agitate him. Through the rearview mirror, I saw him clutching his charred watch, staring out the window into the darkness. I wanted to call out to him. I wanted to tell him I was there. I wanted to ask how much he had suffered these 3 years. But I stayed completely silent. The car left the creek under the heavy humidity of the night. After a few miles, Uncle Arthur checked the rearview mirror and said in a gravelly voice, Clara, there's a motorcycle tailing us. I looked out the window. Small headlights swayed on the lonely highway, getting closer, then backing off. I squeezed my purse, where the Palmetto Ports token rested like a thorn. The car rolled for almost 40 minutes down the dark highway bordering the marshlands. The headlights followed us for a stretch, until Uncle Arthur suddenly killed our headlights and took a sharp turn down a hidden dirt path that cut through a dense canopy of ancient oaks. The tires crunched on gravel. On either side, there was only the sound of cicadas and the smell of stagnant water. Uncle Arthur muttered, Don't worry. Mr. Thomas Sr. used this old logging road when he came out here to hunt. Hardly anyone knows it. I nodded, but I didn't let go of my purse. The Palmetto token was just a piece of plastic, but in that moment, it weighed like an unwritten confession. The cabin by the river appeared through the trees. It was a single-story structure, with faded siding, a mossy tin roof, and an old dock reaching out over the black water. Thomas Sr. had bought it as a weekend refuge decades ago. After his death, Julian rarely mentioned it, and the Hayes family seemed to have forgotten it existed. That's why it was the safest place now. Getting out of the car, Julian froze. He looked at the unfamiliar cabin, then shot me a defensive glare. Where are we? I stayed back. It's a place to rest for a while. Martha and Leo are with you. No one is taking you anywhere. He gripped his watch tightly. I don't know you. I heard that same sentence for the second time, and it hurt just as much, but I only nodded. I know. Just think of me as someone who helped Martha bring you somewhere safe. The old woman gave me a look of profound pity. She helped Julian inside, speaking to him sweetly. 7. Let's go inside, wash your face, and get some soup. I'm right here. Nobody's gonna hurt you. Leo ran after him, turning back to say, Miss Clara, don't be sad. Sometimes Uncle Seven forgets where I leave my flip-flops too. But he's real good. I smiled even though tears wanted to fall. The clumsy comfort of a child warms you more than 100 speeches from adults. A while later, Mitchell arrived. He wore a light jacket, his hair damp from the drizzle. Seeing Julian huddled in a corner of the cabin, he stopped dead, his lips trembling. Julian. Julian jumped, grabbing his head. I quickly pulled Mitchell out onto the porch. Don't call him that abruptly. It terrifies him. Mitchell took a deep breath, his eyes red. I'm sorry, Clara. I couldn't believe it was actually him. I looked inside. Julian was sitting near a small wood-burning stove. Martha handed him a bowl of soup. He held the spoon very slowly, with a clumsiness that broke my heart. Mitchell, if I announce right now that he is alive, what will happen? Mitchell shook his head firmly. You can't. He isn't lucid. He has no ID. He's been living for 3 years under a different name. Preston's faction could easily argue that you hired an imposter to cling to your CEO title. Worst case scenario, they'll erase all the evidence before we can even make a move. So, I stay quiet. It's not about staying quiet. It's about speaking at the exact right moment. It was hard to hear, but he was right. In this life, sometimes to save the people you love, you have to swallow your screams. If you make too much noise, the snake just hides back in the tall grass. Nearly an hour later, Dr. Evelyn Thorne arrived. She was a trauma psychologist Mitchell had called in on an emergency basis. She wasn't wearing a white coat, just a light gray sweater, and spoke very slowly. She sat at a distance from Julian, not staring at him directly. You can call me Evelyn. I'm not going to ask you who you are today. I just want to know if your head hurts, if you have trouble sleeping, or if something scares you. Julian looked at Martha. Seeing her nod, he replied in a very low voice. Fire scares me. Evelyn didn't push. She just took notes and said softly, It is okay to be scared. We don't have to stop being scared today. Standing in the doorway, I heard that simple sentence and felt my chest tighten. For 3 years, I only wanted to bring my husband home. Now I understood that the first thing he needed wasn't to return, but to find peace. After evaluating him, the doctor spoke to me in private. He has symptoms of severe PTSD and dissociative amnesia. It's highly likely his memories haven't completely disappeared. His brain just blocked them out to protect itself. Do not force him to recognize you as his wife. Do not touch him unless he gives you permission. If you want to protect him, first you must become a safe harbor for him. I looked at my own hands. The same hands Julian had held tightly on our wedding day. Now, just to touch him, I had to ask permission from his own fears. That night, Uncle Arthur brought supplies. Rice, eggs, canned goods, medicine, and clean blankets. Seeing Julian, he turned away to wipe his tears. Clara, having young Julian alive is a massive blessing. I'm sure Mr. Thomas Sr. is protecting us from above, I said quietly. Uncle Arthur, I need you to review all the files from the Crimson Wave fire. All the old backups, technical data, port logs, everything related to the night of June 18th. He nodded, his tone firm. I still have some old archive keys that Mr. Thomas Sr. had me keep years ago. I'll see what I can find. Night fell, and the cabin went silent. Martha and Leo slept in the small side room. Julian slept in the back room with the door cracked open. I sat on the porch, listening to the gentle lapping of the river against the wooden pilings. My phone suddenly lit up. It was a text from Preston. Clara, Harrison has booked the ballroom at the Charleston Place Hotel. In 1 week, we'll throw a massive engagement party. Remember, you have your dress fitting tomorrow. Shortly after, a message from Harrison Croft. In a week, you won't have to carry the burden all by yourself anymore. I read both messages, then looked toward the room where my husband was sleeping under the name Uncle Seven. I replied to Preston, I will be there. But before the ceremony, I want both parties to open their financial, operational, and insurance archives, as well as port logs, for a full merger audit. A wedding is for life, and a merger is the future of the company. Everything must be transparent. 10 minutes later, Preston replied. Agreed. So cautious of you. Sounds fine. I will arrange it. I set the phone down. To the public eye, I was the defeated widow about to dress up to marry my husband's rival. But in this hidden cabin, my husband was still alive. And from the moment Preston agreed to open the archives, the steel trap they had set for me began to fracture. I looked out into the pitch-black river and murmured, Julian, this time, I won't let them bury you again. The next morning, I returned to Atlantic Vanguard, maintaining the most serene expression possible. No one knew I hadn't slept for even 2 hours. They also didn't know that in a cabin by the water, Julian was still alive, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. I got into the elevator and looked at myself in the metal mirror. I looked strange. My eyes were puffy and my lips pale, but my spine had to remain straight. Being a daughter-in-law in that family was already difficult, but being the wife of a man the world had declared dead was even harder. And being a wife who, having found her husband, had to pretend to prepare for a wedding with another man. Destiny is sometimes a ruthless screenwriter. As soon as I reached the 17th floor, I saw the communications department rushing around. On the large lobby screen, financial portals flashed new articles. Vanguard CEO opens her heart after tragedy, and Palmetto Ports and Atlantic Vanguard prep for historic merger. I read those lines and let out a bitter smile. They said I was opening my heart, but in reality, I was preparing to pry open drawers full of 3-year-old dust. Preston walked out of the boardroom glowing, as if he had just won the lottery. Clara, you're here. Harrison's people sent over the list of documents to review. I've asked the lawyers to prep everything. I nodded. I want you to add the complete insurance file for the Crimson Wave yacht, the shift logs from that night, harbor departure authorizations, fuel logs, the fire alarm maintenance reports, and the security tapes from the old safe. Preston's smile froze. Why are you digging up something so painful? That case is closed. I looked at him with a monotone expression. Since Palmetto Ports wants a strategic merger, we have to audit all past liabilities. You wouldn't want the shareholders saying tomorrow that we hid debts, lawsuits, or insurance discrepancies from our new partners, would you? Preston stayed silent for a second, then forced a smile. You are so meticulous. Fine. I'll tell them to open the old archive. He turned around, and as he walked away, I noticed him quickly clench his fist and release it. Someone who isn't afraid of a filing cabinet doesn't react like that. Around noon, Harrison arrived with his team of assistants. He brought a large cream-colored box, placing it on my desk. I picked out an engagement dress for you. I hope it's to your liking. I opened the box. Inside was an ivory silk gown with a boat neckline, long sleeves, and hand-embroidered pearls. It was stunning. So beautiful that any woman in love would melt at the sight of it. But to me, it was like a fishing net wrapped in gift paper, waiting to drag me under. I closed the box. Thank you, Harrison. I'll try it on later. He tilted his head slightly. Still so distant. In a week, we'll be family, I replied. In a week is in a week. Today, we are still in the boardroom of Atlantic Vanguard. Harrison smiled, but his eyes remained cold. I like how strict you are. Only a woman like you could hold an empire together. I looked right at him. I hope you are just as strict with your paperwork. The atmosphere turned glacial. Preston hurried to intervene. Come on, it's a happy day. Don't be so defensive, Clara. Harrison understands. He always measures everything down to the millimeter. Julian was like that, too. Hearing my husband's name in his mouth made my stomach churn. The man who hurt him, or at least knew about it, was saying his name with the tone of familial affection. There are people with faces so thick that not even a torrential downpour could wash away their arrogance. In the afternoon, Mitchell Reed arrived, acting as a consultant for the audit. He carried his briefcase and the calm demeanor of someone who knows absolutely nothing. As soon as he entered my office, he lowered his voice. Clara, I reviewed the prenup. That clause about proxy voting rights is lethal. If you sign it, Palmetto Ports practically controls Atlantic Vanguard. I lifted my copy and laughed dryly. So? They want to shackle me to the company using a wedding ring. If I object after the wedding, they'll say I signed it willingly. Willingly? While they hold your head underwater, Mitchell said. Sounds highly legal. He set another stack of papers on the desk. Uncle Arthur called me. He remembered something. Your father-in-law ordered backup tapes of the Crimson Wave cameras to be stored in the old port warehouse. Not many people know they exist. I stood up instantly. To open that warehouse, you need corporate authorization, right? Exactly. And a valid reason. I looked at the audit list in front of me. Then we'll use the merger as the excuse. I'll sign the order to open the old warehouse under the pretext of verifying pre-merger liabilities. Mitchell looked at me. Be careful. Preston must already suspect something. I know. But if we wait, he'll manage to bury the evidence. As the sun set, Eleanor called me. I put her on speakerphone while I signed the documents. Clara, I heard you want to open the yacht fire files. You're starting a new life. Why dig up the past and the pain? I answered Eleanor. Precisely because I am starting a new chapter. Everything must be clean. I don't want them saying I brought a company full of dark secrets into my new marriage. She went quiet. Women shouldn't ask so many questions. If someone saves you, show gratitude. People will say you are an ungrateful wretch who doesn't know how to accept her good fortune. I looked at Julian's photo on the desk. The fortune I get, let me be the one to decide it, ma'am. I hung up before she could say more. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel an ounce of guilt for hanging up on my mother-in-law. Around 6 p.m., Preston brought me a very thin folder. Clara, this is what maintenance found. The Crimson Wave happened a long time ago. A lot of things were damaged by the heat. I'm sure there's nothing important left. I flipped through a couple of pages. Key documents were missing. I looked up. Preston, I need the originals. Not something that's already been filtered. His smile faded slowly. You don't trust me. I put my pen down. Corporate business doesn't run on trust. It runs on paper and ink. He stayed silent for a few seconds, then nodded. Fine, I'll have them open the old archive warehouse. When he left, I texted Uncle Arthur. The warehouse opens tonight. Be ready. He replied with 3 words. Standing by. I sat alone in my office. Outside, the city was illuminated. On the sofa lay the box with Harrison's dress. On the desk, the prenup. In my hand, the freshly signed authorization to open the archives. That wedding dress was supposed to be my death sentence, but they didn't imagine that on the very day I pretended to accept it, the first door to the truth they hid from me for 3 years would begin to swing open. That night I left the office when almost the entire building was dark. My heels echoed sharply in the marble hallways. In my hand, I carried the order to open the old archives. The piece of paper was light, but to get it, I had to fake submission to a matrimonial trap. Uncle Arthur was waiting for me in the underground parking lot. He wore his old jacket, still carrying that distinct smell of engine oil from the docks. Clara. I already told Paul, the night watchman at the old warehouse. He was one of Mr. Thomas Sr. Is loyal men. He's solid. I nodded. Let's go, Uncle Arthur. The night is long, but those trying to cover their tracks surely aren't sleeping. The old archive was in the technical zone near Pier 3, where empty shipping containers formed dark mazes. The night wind whistled through the mooring cables. The room was the size of a small kitchen. The walls were yellowed. On one side stood metal filing cabinets. On the other, dusty boxes of old tapes. Paul, the watchman, let us in with the metal grate halfway down. Miss Clara, Arthur, I can only keep it open for 2 hours. Tomorrow morning, maintenance will notice someone came in. Uncle Arthur patted his shoulder. 2 hours is enough. Just make sure nobody is snooping around outside. Mitchell, the lawyer, was there too. He brought sealed evidence bags and a small camcorder to record how we extracted the documents. He didn't say much, just reminded us that everything we took had to be clearly documented on video. If it went to the police, the chain of custody had to be crystal clear. I stood behind Uncle Arthur, watching Paul open each old cabinet. The sound of the key grinding in the rusted lock sounded like dry metal. Shortly after, he pulled out several boxes of security tapes, logbooks, fire alarm maintenance schedules, departure manifests, and a sealed folder stamped with the logo of the yacht Crimson Wave. Year 2021. Just seeing Crimson Wave 2021 made my eyes sting. Paul loaded one of the tapes into a portable playback monitor. The old screen showed a grainy image of the lower deck hallway of the yacht. The night of June 18th unfolded before me through those blurry frames. At 8:31 p.m., a waiter walked by. At 8:48 p.m., Julian appeared at the end of the hall, holding a glass of water. He was walking unsteadily. I held my breath. Pause. Paul stopped the video. It wasn't high definition, but I recognized his silhouette. He was leaning to one side, his left hand pressing his stomach, exactly like when his ulcers flared up. Behind him walked a man in a waiter's uniform, his head bowed. Mitchell noted the timestamp on his legal pad. At 9:02 p.m. The screen suddenly went black. Uncle Arthur asked Paul to check the other cameras. The hallway, the engine room, the access to the lower deck, they all shut off at the exact same interval. Paul spoke, his voice trembling. This wasn't cause of the fire, ma'am. The fire didn't start for almost another hour. A blackout like this means somebody cut the feed on purpose. For how long? Mitchell asked. Uncle Arthur checked the printed logs and answered with a heavy voice. 47 minutes. I felt a chill run down my spine. 47 minutes is nothing in the span of a lifetime. But it was enough to drag a man to the lower deck, disable the alarms, smuggle a body off the boat, and turn my husband into a corpse in the eyes of the world. Paul checked the fire alarm logs. On the yellowed paper, it clearly stated that the aft alarm had been manually deactivated at 8:59 p.m., right before the fire started. I asked, "Who has the authorization to turn it off?" Paul opened the internal code book and turned pale. This special code is only given to the chief engineer or high-level executives. It says here the code used belonged to Ray Davis, the tech assistant. He's real close with Mr. Preston. After the fire, the kid quit and supposedly moved down to Florida. Mitchell took photos of all the documents instantly. I gripped the edge of the metal table, my nails digging in until it hurt, but I didn't let go. Uncle Arthur opened the harbor departure manifests. At 9:26 p.m., a small auxiliary skiff left the anchorage where the yacht was moored. But in the official accident reports, that skiff was never mentioned. On a blurry, wide-angle port camera, you could see two figures on the skiff and a long, heavy shape covered by a tarp in the center. I stared at the shape under the tarp and felt like ice water was pouring into my chest. What was that? No one answered, because deep down, we all knew that under that tarp was likely Julian. Mitchell placed all the papers, copies of the tapes, and logs into the sealed bags. He pronounced every word clearly. As of right now, These are no longer a widow's suspicions. They are criminal evidence. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. There are truths that, when they are so close, empty you out completely instead of making you cry. Near midnight, I took the copies of the videos and papers to the cabin by the river. Dr. Evelyn Thorne was already there. I didn't want Julian to see the images yet. But Evelyn told me that if we played very brief snippets, without violent scenes, we could try always stopping at the slightest hint of panic. Julian was sitting in a wooden rocking chair on the porch. Hearing me arrive, he looked up, then looked back down at the burnt watch in his hand. He still didn't call me by my name, but he no longer avoided me. Just like the first day, I placed the portable monitor at a distance. Can you look at this for a little bit? If your head hurts, I'll turn it off instantly. He looked at Martha. She nodded, and he slowly turned his gaze to the screen. It showed Julian walking down the hallway. He frowned, his grip tightening on the armrest. When the screen showed the skiff and the tarp-covered shape, his lips began to tremble. "Oil," he whispered. Evelyn spoke to him calmly. "What does it smell like? What do you remember?" His breathing accelerated. "Diesel." Very dark. I stood behind the doctor, motionless. Julian grabbed his head, his voice cracking. "No. Don't throw me." "Preston!" I felt like a dagger was driven into my chest. Evelyn shut the screen off immediately and stepped closer, though without touching him. "Stop right there. You are in a safe place. With Martha. With Leo. There is no fire." Julian curled into himself. Sweat dripped onto the floorboards. Martha placed a clean towel over his hand. 7. Breathe. Son. I buried my face in my hands and finally broke down sobbing. Not out of weakness, but because Preston's name had just fallen from my husband's own lips. It was no longer just a suspicion of mine. That night, when Julian finally fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion, I stayed on the porch, looking at the black waters of the river. On my phone, Preston had texted, "Clara, remember the dress fitting tomorrow? Harrison is very excited." I read it and turned off the screen. Tomorrow I would go try on the dress. Tomorrow I would smile and let them think the net was closing around me. But those 47 missing minutes had returned, and this time they would drag every single person who buried my husband alive right into the light. On the morning of the 5th day, I didn't go to the office. I said I was going to my dress fitting and checking on the event preparations. Preston sent me a sickly sweet message. "You just relax. I'll handle things at the office." I read it and felt disgusted. To oust someone from power, sometimes you don't have to scream. You just politely pull their chair away and tell them to rest. Mitchell picked me up in a silver family sedan, not the usual corporate car. He handed me a baseball cap and a medical mask. "Clara, today we are seeing 2 people. Old Pete, the mechanic who serviced the Crimson Wave's secondary systems, and Lauren, the cocktail waitress from the main lounge that night." "Are they still in Charleston?" I asked. "Pete is, but he quit his job and lives in North Charleston. Lauren moved up to Somerville and opened a small diner. Both received large cash deposits after the fire." I looked out the window. The morning streets were full of traffic, but in my chest, there was only a freezing void. "From who?" Mitchell answered quietly. "Through Ray Davis, Preston's friend. Old Pete's house was at the end of an alley, its siding covered in mildew. Work clothes stained with grease hung on the porch. Pete, about 60 years old, gray-haired and slightly hunched, refused to speak as soon as Mitchell handed him his business card. "I don't know nothing. I already talked to the cops. It was an accident. Don't come back." I pulled down my mask. "Mr. Pete." "I am Julian Hayes' wife." He froze, looked at me with bloodshot eyes, and quickly looked away. "I'm sorry for your loss, but there ain't no sense in digging up the dead. It just brings pain." I showed him the screen of my phone with the photo of Julian sitting in the cabin. A profile shot, thinner, hair longer, but clearly showing the scar and the burned watch. Pete looked at it and started to shake. The glass of water on his table fell to the floor with a dull thud. Mister. Julian is alive? I stared at him without blinking. Alive, but without his memory. Terrified of fire and the voices of strangers. For these 3 years, you have been able to sleep in peace. The man slumped into a chair, covering his grease-stained face with his hands. A rough, hardened mechanic crying like a child. I thought they were just smuggling contraband. I swear to God, I didn't know they were going to kill somebody. Mitchell turned on a digital recorder and placed it on the table, maintaining his calm. Tell us everything from the beginning. Only the truth. Pete confessed that before that night, Ray Davis gave him $20,000 in cash in exchange for tilting the angle of the hallway camera and shutting off the aft alarm for a few minutes. Ray told him they were moving sensitive cargo and didn't want a record. Pete was broke. His wife needed dialysis. He had debts. The money was too much, and his conscience caved. I finished my shift and got off the boat before 9 p.m. When I heard about the fire the next morning, I almost died of a heart attack. Ray told me if I opened my mouth, my family would pay the price. Later, he gave me a bit more cash and forced me to testify that there was a thermal failure in the sensors. I asked, "Do you have proof?" He stood up shakily, moved a loose floorboard under his bed, and pulled out an old burner phone wrapped in plastic. I never dared to use it or throw it away. Got a few texts from Ray on here. Kept it just in case. I knew I did wrong, but I was scared they'd try to silence me one day. Mitchell bagged the phone using a handkerchief. Leaving Pete's house, I didn't say a single word. There are truths that, upon hearing them, don't relieve the burden, but only give shape to the wound. That same afternoon, we found the small diner in Somerville. Lauren, the waitress, recognized me instantly. She was serving drinks. Her tray trembled, and she went pale. "I'm closed. Please leave." I walked up to her and lowered my voice. "Lauren, my husband is still alive." She dropped a spoon into the coffee maker, splashing hot water everywhere, but didn't even flinch. Mitchell showed her the photo. Lauren broke down crying and dragged us into the back room. "It's my fault. Forgive me. I failed Mr. Julian and you." I sat across from her. "Tell me, what did you see that night?" Lauren wiped her tears with her apron. That night, I was serving the guests in the lounge. A maintenance guy handed me a glass of water to take down to Mr. Julian because he said his stomach was acting up. I didn't suspect anything. I just did my job. A little while after he drank it, he went real pale. He was holding onto the wall, barely able to walk. Her words caught in her throat as she wrung her hands. I saw 2 guys carrying him down the stairs. One was a waiter, the other was dressed in dark clothes, staying back in the shadows. I didn't dare look too close. "Did you see Preston?" I asked. Lauren bit her lip. I didn't see his face clearly, but I know his voice. He said, "Take him below deck first. Don't let anyone see." I'll never forget that voice. My chest seized with agony. And then what? After the fire, they found me. Gave me $10,000 and told me to move out to the country and never set foot in Charleston again. They knew my brother works offshore on the crab boats. They threatened me. Said if I talked, my brother might have an accident at sea. She covered her face, sobbing. I was a coward. I took the money. I told myself that since he was already dead, I wouldn't be saving anyone by opening my mouth. But for 3 years, every night I dream about that hallway. I dream about Mr. Julian leaning against the wall, pale, while I did nothing. I closed my eyes. $10,000 to buy silence. $20,000 to twist a camera. And 3 years of a man's life thrown into the mud like an anonymous garbage bag. Mitchell, he told Lauren, just as he had told Pete, "From today on, you cannot be alone. My firm will put you in a safe house and process witness protection. If you want to redeem yourself, you have to stay alive to speak at the trial." Lauren nodded as tears dripped onto her apron. Walking back to the car, I saw a dark sedan parked across the street. The window rolled down for a second, then rolled back up. Mitchell saw it too. He didn't say anything, just opened the car door for me. We drove off, and at that instant, my phone vibrated. A text from Preston. "Clara, which boutique did you go to? Harrison said the tailor shop didn't see you." I looked at that line of text. It froze my blood. He was already sniffing around. I replied, "I went to a private seamstress. I'll drop by the hotel tomorrow to see the ballroom." 3 minutes later, a text arrived from a blocked number. "The dead should rest in peace. The living shouldn't dig graves." I stared at the screen for a long time and showed it to Mitchell. He just said, "They're scared." I looked back at the highway. For the first time in 3 years, fear wasn't just residing in my heart. It was slithering toward those who thought they had buried everything under the ashes. On the 6th day, I woke up while the river was still covered in a layer of morning fog. The old cabin was unusually quiet. The distant crow of a rooster, the gentle lap of water against the posts, and the crackle of the fire Martha was building in the kitchen. Everything was muted, as if they feared any sudden noise would scare Julian. Since he arrived, he hadn't slept peacefully. Sometimes he'd wake up startled, drenched in sweat, clutching his charred watch. Other times he would stare out the window at the dark water, as if trying to rescue some memory washed away by the tide. Martha would sit next to him and calm him. 7. "There's no fire, son. Grandma's here. Leo's here." Every time I heard that, I stayed outside the room, biting my lip until it bled. My husband was right there, and I couldn't hug him, or shake him, or say, "I am here," to quench the thirst of 3 years of yearning. Dr. Evelyn had been very strict. A mind that has lived in terror for so long is like a bird with a broken wing. If you want it to fly again, first you have to let it trust your hand. That morning, Dr. Evelyn arrived early. She wasn't wearing a white coat, just her gray sweater, hair tied back. She carried a canvas bag. Inside was a piece of rope smelling of the sea, a scrap of dark tarp, a small speaker playing the soft sound of ocean waves, and Julian's watch. She placed each item on the wooden table, but not too close to him. "We aren't going to try to remember everything today," she said slowly. "We're just going to look a little, listen a little. If you feel sick, we stop immediately." Julian sat in the chair by the window. Martha knitted beside him. Leo sat on the doorstep, staring at his Uncle Seven without blinking. I stayed near the door, at a distance where he wouldn't feel cornered. He looked at the objects, and his eyes settled on the watch. After a long time, he reached out and touched the cracked glass. I felt a knot in my throat. I bought him that watch for his 36th birthday. That day, he put it on and showed it to me, grinning like a kid. "If my wife gives it to me, I'll wear it until it breaks." And it really brained, sir. In a night of fire, along with the peace of our entire lives. "Doctor." Evelyn turned on the sound of the waves, a murmur that filled the room. Julian frowned and gripped the watch tighter. "What do you see?" the doctor asked. He shook his head. "Darkness." "In that darkness, is there a smell?" His lips trembled. "Diesel. Smoke. And a glass of water," tested bitter. I gripped the doorframe, every muscle tense, making no sound. Evelyn didn't push. She moved the piece of rope closer, then the dark tarp so he could see it. "Do you remember where you were?" Julian began to breathe heavily. "The hallway. Below the boat. It was hard to walk." Someone said, "Julian, rest a bit." He grimaced, putting a hand over his stomach. "It hurt so bad. My head was spinning. My legs wouldn't work." Martha stopped knitting. Leo held his breath. The doctor moved the dark tarp a little closer. As soon as Julian's eyes landed on it, all color drained from his face. They put a tarp over me. His voice sounded hoarse. I couldn't see anything. Someone was pulling my feet. The floor was freezing. My shoulder hurt. I heard a metal door slam shut. I felt my heart shattering into pieces. I pictured my husband being dragged down a cold corridor, covered up like freight, pushed out of his own life while he was still breathing. Julian suddenly gritted his teeth. Preston. That name dropped into the room like a heavy stone in still water. Martha looked up sharply. Leo's eyes widened, and I stood paralyzed, digging my nails into my palms. Doctor, Evelyn asked very softly. What did you hear Preston say? Julian shook, sweat rolling down his forehead. Don't blame me, brother. He swallowed hard, as if every word tore at his throat. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for being in the wrong place. I closed my eyes. Preston, the half-brother who had bowed his head before his father's portrait. The one who called me sister-in-law. The one who said he only wanted to save the company. In my husband's broken memories, he wasn't a bystander. He was there that night. The doctor wanted to stop, but Julian kept murmuring. There was someone else. Who? He shook his head, his eyes bloodshot. Didn't see his face. Voice was different. He said, "Do it fast before the wind changes." A full-body shudder ran through me. Before the wind changes, I had heard Harrison Croft use that exact phrase in an old negotiation. He said it slowly, with the confidence of someone used to calculating the course of a ship. Now. That phrase connected the burning yacht directly to Palmetto ports. Julian began to hyperventilate. Evelyn shut off the wave sounds instantly and pulled the tarp and rope away. We stop here. You are in the cabin. There is no fire. No one is pulling you. Do you hear me? Julian curled into himself, clutching his head in his hands. Martha dropped her knitting and spoke with a shaky voice. 7. Breathe. Son. Breathe like I taught you. In and out. Nobody's taking you. I took a step forward and stopped. I was shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to run and hold him, tell him I believed him, that I heard everything, that I would make them pay. But I had to stand still. Standing still was the hardest way I had ever loved him in my life. A while later, Julian looked up. He scanned the room until his eyes stopped on me. I didn't dare call out to him too loudly. I just said, Julian. He looked at me for a long time. In his eyes, there was still fog, still pain, and a guilt he didn't quite know how to name yet. But the terrified distance from the first day at the creek was gone. Then, he called my name in a whisper. Clara. With that single word, I felt my legs give out. In 3 years, how many people had called my name? Eleanor to reprimand me. Preston to manipulate me. The shareholders to question me. The press to dig for gossip. But no name hurt and revived me as much as hearing it from his mouth. I nodded as the tears fell. Yes, I am here. Leaning on the arms of the chair, Julian walked slowly toward me. The doctor didn't stop him. An arm's length away, he paused, as if he still feared his memories were deceiving him. I remember you crying. I started to cry and laugh at the same time. You cried a lot. So much I thought you ran out of tears, he said. He lifted his hand. I didn't dare move. After a few seconds, he placed his hand on my shoulder. It was a feather-light touch, as if he feared I would vanish. But to me, it carried the weight of 3 years of waiting. Standing by the door, I brought my hands to my face and wept. Martha turned her head away, grumbling affectionately. That sea wind blowing in the house sure makes your eyes water. No one said anything else. When Julian calmed down, Dr. Evelyn reminded us of something crucial. What he remembered today was vital. But we could only use what he was absolutely certain of in a legal setting. A damaged mind is like a skin wound. Scratching too deep only makes it bleed again. Mitchell listened to the recording and nodded. Clara, tomorrow is the engagement party. The shareholders, the press, the bank, Eleanor, Preston, and Harrison will all be there. If we expose it there, they will have no escape. Julian turned to me. In his gaze, there was lucidity now. And pain. Are you still going to stand next to that man? I looked into his eyes. Only for the last time. And I won't be there to be his bride. I will be there to pull you out of the grave they dug for you. He stayed quiet, then nodded slowly. Late that afternoon, I returned to the Charleston Place Hotel to get ready. I didn't put on the ivory silk dress Harrison had sent. I chose an elegant but very dark navy blue business dress. Almost black. It wasn't dazzling, but it was sober and cold enough to allow me to walk onto that stage with a straight spine. In the fitting room, looking in the mirror, I saw the faded jacket Julian wore at the creek hanging on the chair behind me. The weathered fabric still smelled of salt, the ocean, and the days he survived without knowing who he was. On one side was the outfit I would wear for the farce. On the other, the jacket of the man who had returned from death. I looked at both in the mirror. I wiped away a tear and told myself that tomorrow, I wouldn't be anyone's bride. I was going to bring my husband back home using the exact same stage they had built to steal his legacy. Sunday, the 18th of June 2024, the grand ballroom of the Charleston Place Hotel was adorned with cascades of white flowers. From the entrance, a large digital screen glowed with gold lettering over a crimson background. Celebration of engagement and strategic merger between Atlantic Vanguard and Palmetto Ports. The spotlights highlighted massive vases of orchids. Everything was as luxurious as it was freezing, exactly like a loveless wedding, just a contract wrapped in lace. I waited in the anteroom, listening to the chatter of the guests, the clinking of champagne glasses, the flashes of cameras. Almost all the major shareholders of Atlantic Vanguard had attended, along with bank representatives and business journalists. Everyone was eager for the news of the merger. Preston walked into the room and looked me up and down. He frowned when he saw me in the dark dress instead of the bridal gown. Clara, why aren't you wearing what Harrison bought you? I buttoned my cuffs deliberately. I am wearing what I consider appropriate. He forced a smile. Today is a happy day. Don't make people uncomfortable. Harrison prepared everything with so much care. I looked at him through the mirror. It's better to be uncomfortable for a moment than to live a mistake for a lifetime, Preston. His smile faltered. He wanted to ask something, but just then, Eleanor walked in. She wore a purple velvet suit and a pearl necklace, impeccably made up. Seeing me, she flashed her best maternal smile for the lurking photographers. My dear, you look beautiful today. You've finally decided to think about the future. I turned to her. For 3 years, I had treated her like my mother-in-law. For 3 years, I wanted to believe that, even as a stepmother, she loved Julian in her own way. But now, seeing her smile, I only felt profound exhaustion. Today, I will think very seriously about the future. She didn't catch my tone. She stepped closer and squeezed my hand. A silent warning. When you go out there, remember to speak softly. Do not embarrass us. All the press and the banks are watching. I pulled my hand away. The Hayes family lost its dignity the day they used one of their own sons' lives as a bargaining chip. She paled. What are you talking about? Before she could answer, the MC's voice echoed in the main ballroom. Eleanor shot me one last glare, entirely stripped of sweetness, and walked out ahead of me. Harrison Croft stood in the center of the stage in an immaculate black suit and burgundy tie. He possessed the poise of someone who knows he has won. On the table next to him rested the merger contract, the rings, and a bouquet of flowers. Seeing me, he held out his hand. Clara, today, you no longer have to carry the weight alone. I looked at his hand and walked straight to the podium without taking it. Preston quickly grabbed the microphone and smiled at the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, after many hardships, my sister-in-law has finally chosen the best path for Atlantic Vanguard. If my brother Julian were here watching us from heaven, I am sure he would rest in peace. Lukewarm applause rippled through the room. Hearing from heaven left a bile taste in my throat, calling a living man a ghost, and using his name to steal his company in the same breath. The MC handed the floor to me. I took the microphone, and silence fell over the room. I scanned the faces. Eleanor in the front row with a silk handkerchief, Preston standing next to Harrison, his eyes shining in anticipation of my submission. Harrison maintaining his smile, waiting for my words of gratitude. I spoke, enunciating every syllable. Thank you all for coming. But before anything else, I need to clarify something. There will be no engagement today. A murmur of absolute shock filled the room. Preston stepped forward quickly. Clara, what are you saying? You're just nervous. You misspoke, right? I didn't look at him. I didn't misspeak. And I am not so exhausted that I don't know where I am standing. Harrison Croft took a step forward, struggling to keep his tone affable. Clara, there are a lot of people here. If something is wrong, let's discuss it in private. Don't let emotions ruin this important moment. I turned to him. No, Harrison. Burying the dead alive isn't something that should be discussed in private. That sentence paralyzed the entire ballroom for several seconds. I continued speaking into the mic. If Julian Hayes truly died 3 years ago, why has someone been relentlessly sabotaging Atlantic Vanguard ever since? Why was a $40 million line of credit blocked at this exact moment? Why was an $8 million contract suddenly transferred to Palmetto Ports? And why, in the prenuptial agreement, did Mr. Harrison add a clause to strip me of all my voting rights for 5 years? The uproar erupted like crashing waves. I pressed the button on the remote in my hand, and the massive screen behind me lit up. First, the grainy video from the Crimson Wave's old camera. The lower deck hallway in the dark. Julian appeared on screen with his glass of water, walking clumsily. Then, exactly at 9:02 p.m., everything went black. This is the security backup that was still stored in the port warehouses. I projected my voice over the murmurs. An hour before the yacht caught fire, the cameras from multiple angles were simultaneously cut off for 47 minutes. And it wasn't because of the fire, because the fire hadn't even started yet. I clicked the button again. The fire alarm log appeared. The letters were faded, but legible. This is the emergency log. The aft alarm was manually turned off at 8:59 p.m., right before the fire. The access code used belonged to Ray Davis, technical assistant, and Preston Hayes' right-hand man. Preston yelled out, "Fake! Those are forged documents." I looked right at him. If they are fake, you just have to wait for the police to verify them. Why are you shouting? His face was livid. I clicked again. On the screen appeared the harbor departure manifest and the blurry video clip in the corner. This is the record of an auxiliary skiff that set sail at 9:26 p.m. But it never appeared in the official accident report. On that skiff were 2 people and a long, heavy shape covered by a tarp. And that shape was very likely my husband. The ballroom exploded into chaos. Some people stood up. The journalists raised their cameras en masse. The bankers exchanged grim looks. I didn't stop. Financial documents flashed on the screen. And here we have receipts for $2,800,000 that passed through a shell company linked to Harrison Croft's inner circle. Here is the sworn declaration of Old Pete, the mechanic who took $20,000 to tamper with the cameras and silence the alarms during that blackout. And here is the statement of Lauren, the waitress who saw Julian being given a laced glass of water before being dragged to the lower deck. Eleanor clutched her chest and collapsed back into her chair. My God, Clara is sick. Someone get her off the stage. She's lost her mind. I looked at her, and the pain hardened my voice. Don't rush to cry, Eleanor. You still have things to hear. Harrison Croft turned to the AV technicians, gesturing wildly for them to cut the screen, but Mitchell Reed was already standing by the control panel, flanked by 2 hotel security guards. Mitchell held up the evidence binder and spoke firmly into the secondary microphone. All the material logs, tapes, and testimonies has already been notarized and handed over to the competent authorities. No one has the right to destroy them. Preston ran to the edge of the stage, pointing a trembling finger at me. Sister-in-law, just because you don't want to get married, you invented all this to destroy me. I am Julian's brother. I am a Hayes. I answered through the microphone. If you are his brother, then tell me, why is it that when Julian hears your name, he is terrified and grabs his head? Why, when he panics, is your name the first one he remembers? Preston froze. At that precise moment, the side doors of the ballroom opened, and Julian walked in. He wore a simple white button-down shirt and his faded gray jacket over it. Doctor, Evelyn walked by his side. Mitchell signaled the assistants to keep their distance. Julian's face was very thin, and the exhaustion was still visible in his eyes. But it was him. Julian, the man the entire room believed had been 6 feet under for 3 years. Someone dropped a champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor. Gasps of my God! It's... Julian echoed through the room. Eleanor stood up abruptly, her lips trembling uncontrollably. Julian. Preston took a step back, white as a sheet, as if all the blood had been sucked out of him. Harrison Croft lost his eternal smile, and the knuckles of his hand still holding the ring box turned stark white. Julian scanned everyone in the room, and finally his eyes locked onto Preston. He stayed quiet for a long time, as if he needed to gather all his strength from those shattered memories. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, but every word fell into the silent room with absolute clarity. You didn't want to save Atlantic Vanguard. You wanted to bury me a second time. Total silence invaded the ballroom, as if all outside noise had been muted. Julian stood there, thinner, paler, but in his eyes burned the same determination from his past. He didn't walk fast. Doctor, Evelyn had whispered to him to only say what he was 100% sure of. Julian nodded and looked directly at Preston. That night, I drank the water one of your men gave me. Then I got dizzy, and my stomach hurt so much I couldn't stand. I remember the smell of diesel. I remember the tarp you put over my face. I remember being dragged down the cold hallway. And I remember the sentence you whispered in my ear. Julian paused, breathing heavily. Don't blame me, brother. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for being in the wrong place. Preston shook his head desperately. No, it's not true. They brainwashed you. You're confused. I bet she made you believe that. Mitchell stepped forward. Julian's memory is not our only evidence. He placed his hand on the documents. We have the camera feeds cut for 47 minutes. The alarms deactivated before the fire. The hidden reports of the skiff leaving. We have the testimonies of the mechanic and the waitress who saw you take him. And finally, the money that Palmetto Ports funneled through intermediaries. The room was a boiling pot. People covered their mouths. Others exchanged stunned glances. The very shareholders who 10 minutes ago were applauding the engagement were now ghost white. 2 men in dark suits walked in from the side aisle. One of them flashed a police badge. Mr. Preston Hayes, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, and Mr. Harrison Croft. We request you accompany us to the precinct to give a statement regarding these events. Everyone else, please remain calm. Harrison paled, but tried to maintain his untouchable corporate posture. Officers, you cannot smear the name of my company based on uncorroborated documents, Mitchell retorted. We do not issue the verdict, but the evidence is documented, and the justice system will do its job. Preston suddenly let out a dry, unhinged laugh, completely detached from his good brother facade. Sure you will. I just wanted to help you, right, sister-in-law? Bullshit. You're all on his side. My father always treated Julian like his only son. And what about me? I have the Hayes name too, but I had to stand by and watch him take the entire shipping line. He yelled, "So you tried to murder your own brother because you felt left out?" Preston turned to me, his eyes bloodshot. "And what do you know? You're just a daughter-in-law. You think you're better than me? A woman who's been in the family for a couple of years sitting in the CEO's chair, while I, with Hayes' blood in my veins, had to bow my head and call you sister-in-law." Eleanor screamed, "Shut up, Preston!" But it was too late. When greed explodes, no silk handkerchief can cover it up. I pulled a yellowed, very old envelope from the file. "This is a letter my father-in-law, Thomas Hayes Sr., left with his lawyer before he died. In it, he wrote that he had considered giving you a chance on the executive board, but then he discovered you were selling our shipping routes' trade secrets to the competition. That is why he stripped you of all decision-making power." Eleanor slumped back into her chair, devoid of a single drop of color. I looked at her, and for the first time, addressed her directly. "Eleanor, you knew this. You knew Thomas Sr. didn't sideline your son for no reason, but for these 3 years, you used the family altar, your tears, and the word family to force me to hand the position over to Preston. You didn't start the fire, but you covered up the ashes to protect the one who truly deserved to pay." She sobbed. "I was just terrified of losing another son," I replied quietly. "And because of that, you chose to let my husband lose everything all over again." The sentence silenced her. Harrison Croft was escorted toward the exit to testify about the financial conspiracy, the diversion of clients, and the attempt to seize our board of directors through a rigged marriage. Preston was also taken away. As he passed by me, he shot me a look of pure hatred, but he was unable to articulate a word. Eleanor had to be escorted out, supported by her arms. Before leaving, she turned to Julian and murmured, "Julian, son." Julian looked at her for a long time and replied, "You stopped being my mother the day you chose to cover for them." She broke down crying again. But this time, no one ran to comfort her. The next day, the failed engagement dominated the headlines. The press no longer talked about the enamored widow, but about the truth behind the Crimson Wave mystery. The authorities continued the investigation. Those who accepted bribes went in to testify, and Ray Davis was captured a few days later after trying to flee. Atlantic Vanguard did not sink. The bank reopened the lines of credit after reviewing the new information. A few clients called to apologize, claiming they had been fed false rumors. I simply replied, "Long-term business requires trust and sincerity. I hope in the future you look at the truth and aren't guided by rumors." I continued to handle the executive role temporarily while Julian slowly rebuilt his life with the constant help of Dr. Evelyn. He didn't remember everything yet. There were days when he was completely lucid, and others when he would stand by the window for a long time, looking out at the water, searching his memory for the pieces the current had washed away. But every day, he said my name a little more naturally. "Clara, have you had breakfast? Clara, can I go outside for a bit today? Clara, I remember that beef stew you used to make me." Small sentences that, every time I heard them, filled my chest with warmth. People say marriage is a bond for life. Sometimes that bond isn't made of giant promises or expensive dinners. It's made of one person willing to wait and another willing to fight to find their way back home. We invited Grandma Martha and the boy Leo to the shipping headquarters. I didn't frame it as a charity photo op. I spoke in front of all the company employees. These are the benefactors of my family and of Atlantic Vanguard. Without Martha and Leo, our true CEO would never have returned. Leo stared at the floor, his ears red as tomatoes. Martha just smiled, the wrinkles around her mouth deepening. "I didn't do nothing extraordinary, Miss Clara. Somebody washes up half dead on your doorstep, and if they're breathing, you help 'em. Down at the creek, anyone would have done the same." I felt a knot in my throat hearing her. There were people so poor in money, but with hearts so immense that all the wealth in the world couldn't buy them. A month later, We returned to the coastal cemetery. It was a clear day, no drizzle, no freezing wind. The sun illuminated the tops of the pine trees, and the murmur of the ocean seemed softer. I carried a clean towel in my purse. But this time, I didn't have to wipe any photograph. It was Julian himself who stood for a long time in front of his cenotaph, reading the headstone that bore his name. He spoke quietly. For 3 years, you came to this place all alone. I nodded. Yes, I would stand here telling you about work, even telling you about the days when I was so exhausted I just wanted to quit. He turned to me, his eyes red. Forgive me. I let you carry all this weight for far too long. I pried the photo off the headstone and hugged it to my chest. That glass that had been with me on days of sun and storm, that I had wiped clean while crying countless times. Now, holding it in my hands, I didn't feel cold at all. Just having you back is enough. Julian reached out and held my hand tightly. This time, his hand wasn't trembling. The wind blew through the pines gently. So different from all the other days. The empty tomb would stay there, but from then on, it would no longer be a monument to a lie. It would only be a reminder that even for someone trapped in the deepest darkness, as long as there is another person who refuses to surrender, the light always ends up finding its way back. In this life, money can blind many, but love and honesty are the only anchors that keep a family from shipwrecking. Sometimes the good guys have to suffer first, but destiny never permanently abandons those with a pure heart.